Have you ever watched someone retreat into themselves the moment you finally found your voice? That peculiar dance happens when avoidants encounter something they fear most: your unwavering resolve. What avoidants fear most when you stand your ground isn't your anger, your tears, or even your ultimatums. It's something far more primal, something that strikes at the very core of their psychological architecture. They fear the mirror you hold up to their carefully constructed fortress of independence. And more terrifyingly, they fear that their meticulously orchestrated control is slipping through their fingers like sand. Picture this scenario. Someone who has spent years perfecting the art of emotional distance suddenly faces a partner who refuses to chase, who won't bend to accommodate their hot and cold patterns, who simply stands firm in their own worth. The avoidance world shifts on its axis. Their tried and true strategies of push and pull, the ones that have worked so reliably to maintain that perfect distance, suddenly hit an immovable object. Think of Emily Cooper from Emily in Paris. Imagine if Gabriel had simply stopped playing into her uncertainty and declared his intentions with absolute clarity, refusing to engage in the back and forth that kept them in perpetual limbo. This phenomenon reveals itself through two powerful psychological forces that govern human behavior: reactance and loss aversion. Reactance is that rebellious surge that rises when someone feels their freedom is being threatened, even when that threat is merely the presence of someone who won't be swayed by their usual tactics. Loss aversion runs deeper. It's the gnawing recognition that something valuable is slipping away, combined with the terrifying realization that their usual methods of regaining control simply won't work anymore. Understanding these mechanisms isn't just academic curiosity. It's the key to transforming relationships stuck in endless cycles of pursuit and distance. When you truly grasp what happens in the avoidant mind, when confronted with your unwavering boundaries, everything changes. You stop taking their reactions personally. You stop interpreting their withdrawal as rejection. Most importantly, you stop abandoning yourself in desperate attempts to pull them closer. The story begins with someone who had mastered the delicate choreography of keeping others at arm's length. Let's call them Alex. Brilliant, successful, utterly convinced that independence was the highest virtue. Alex had perfected what seemed like an art form, drawing people in just close enough to enjoy their company, their admiration, their care, but never close enough to feel truly vulnerable or accountable to their needs. For years, this strategy worked flawlessly. Partners would dance around Alex's boundaries, making themselves smaller, asking for less, grateful for whatever crumbs of intimacy were offered. They would chase when Alex pulled away, celebrate when Alex returned, and never question why they always felt like they were walking on eggshells. The dynamic was as predictable as clockwork. Alex held all the cards, controlled the tempo, and could disappear or reappear whenever the pressure of closeness became uncomfortable. Then came Morgan, who initially seemed to fit the familiar pattern. Morgan was drawn to Alex's confidence, intrigued by their mysterious nature, willing to work for their attention. For months, the dance continued as expected. Alex would share just enough to keep Morgan interested, then retreat when things felt too intimate. Morgan would pursue, worry, adjust their behavior to avoid triggering Alex's withdrawal. It was a waltz they both knew by heart. But something shifted after Morgan witnessed Alex's third disappearing act in 2 months. Instead of the usual anxious texts and calls, instead of the overthinking and self-blame, Morgan simply stopped. Not in anger, not in manipulation, but with a quiet dignity that Alex had never encountered before. When Alex finally reached out with their usual casual message, expecting the warm reception they'd always received after their cooling-off periods, Morgan's response was measured and calm. Morgan didn't demand explanations or make emotional pleas. They simply stated their reality. When someone important disappears without communication, it doesn't work for me. Moving forward, Consistent communication is something I need in any relationship that matters to me. No ultimatum, no drama, just a clear statement of personal standards. This response triggered something unprecedented in Alex's world. For the first time, their strategy of intermittent reinforcement, that powerful psychological tool that keeps people hooked through unpredictable rewards, had hit an immovable boundary. Morgan wasn't playing the game anymore. They weren't chasing, weren't anxiously waiting, weren't making themselves smaller to accommodate Alex's comfort zone. The reactance hit Alex like a wave. Their internal monologue became a chorus of resistance. Who are they to demand anything from me? I don't answer to anyone. This is exactly why relationships don't work. People always want to control you. But underneath the indignation lurked something more unsettling, the creeping awareness that their usual toolkit of emotional management was suddenly useless. Days passed. Alex waited for Morgan to crack, to reach out with the familiar anxiety that had always eventually surfaced. But Morgan's social media showed someone living their life fully, surrounded by friends, pursuing interests, radiating the kind of contentment that comes from self-respect rather than external validation. The silence stretched on, and Alex began to experience something they'd spent their entire adult life avoiding: the genuine possibility of loss without any clear path to regain control. Loss aversion kicked in with startling intensity. Suddenly, Alex could see all of Morgan's qualities with painful clarity: their kindness, their intelligence, the easy way they laughed, how they remembered small details, their ability to create warmth in any room. These qualities, which Alex had taken for granted while maintaining their emotional distance, now seemed precious and irreplaceable. The prospect of losing Morgan felt catastrophic in a way that Alex couldn't rationalize away. But here's where the story takes its most crucial turn. Alex's instinct was to launch a charm offensive, to love-bomb their way back into Morgan's good graces, to promise change while secretly planning to return to their comfort zone once the immediate threat passed. Yet Morgan's response to these attempts revealed something that shook Alex to their core. Morgan remained kind but unmoved, warm but unwavering. They appreciated Alex's words, but made it clear that actions over time were what mattered now. For someone who had built their entire identity around independence and emotional self-sufficiency, this was devastating. Alex couldn't manipulate their way out of the situation. They couldn't retreat without losing something valuable. They couldn't advance without genuinely confronting the vulnerability they'd spent decades avoiding. Morgan's ground standing had created what therapists call a therapeutic bind, a situation where all the old coping mechanisms become impossible, forcing genuine change or genuine loss. The resolution came slowly, painfully, and required Alex to face their deepest fears about intimacy and accountability. They had to learn that true strength isn't the ability to remain untouchable, but the courage to let someone matter enough to influence how you show up in the world. Now, when you find yourself facing someone whose avoidant patterns have left you feeling perpetually off balance, understanding this dynamic becomes your compass. The first and most crucial step is recognizing that their fear isn't about you personally. It's about losing the control that has felt essential to their survival. When Joe Goldberg from the Netflix series You encounters someone who won't be consumed by his intensity, his entire worldview crumbles because his strategies suddenly become powerless. The same principle applies here, though hopefully with far healthier intentions. Standing your ground begins with clarity about your own non-negotiables. This isn't about issuing ultimatums or trying to change someone else's behavior. It's about honest self-examination. What treatment genuinely doesn't work for you? What patterns leave you feeling diminished or disrespected? Write these down not as weapons to wield in arguments, but as guideposts for your own behavior. When someone consistently communicates through mixed signals, when they disappear without explanation, when they keep you guessing about where you stand, these aren't quirks to accommodate, but patterns that impact your well-being. The second step involves communicating your boundaries with what therapists call non-anxious presence. Think of how Serena van der Woodsen from Gossip Girl might handle a situation when she's at her most centered, not reactive, not pleading, but simply clear about her reality. You're not trying to convince anyone of anything or prove that you're worthy of better treatment. You're stating facts about your own experience and needs. The language becomes, when communication is inconsistent, I feel unsettled and it doesn't work for me, rather than, you never communicate properly and it's driving me crazy. Understanding reactance helps you anticipate and navigate their initial response. When someone feels their freedom is being threatened, they often double down on the very behaviors you've identified as problematic. They might become more distant, more unpredictable, or even hostile. This isn't evidence that your boundaries are wrong. It's evidence that they're working. You're no longer participating in the dynamic that allowed them to maintain comfortable distance while keeping you available for their convenience. This is where loss aversion becomes your unlikely ally, though patience is absolutely essential. As long as you chase, accommodate, and make yourself smaller to manage their comfort, they never truly experience the possibility of losing you. You're always there, always available, always willing to restart the cycle after they've had their space. But when you stop chasing, when you start living your life with fullness and joy, regardless of their participation, something fundamental shifts in the equation. The key is that this cannot be a strategy or a manipulation. Avoidant individuals are extraordinarily skilled at detecting inauthentic behavior, probably because they've used it so extensively themselves. Your ground standing must come from genuine self-respect and a real willingness to walk away if the relationship cannot meet your fundamental needs. This isn't about punishing them or trying to force change. It's about honoring yourself enough to stop participating in dynamics that leave you feeling perpetually unsettled. Practical implementation means changing your responses to their typical patterns. When they withdraw, you don't pursue. When they return with casual contact that ignores the withdrawal, you don't pretend it didn't happen. When they offer just enough connection to keep you engaged but not enough to feel secure, you don't accept those crumbs as sufficient. Instead, you respond to what is actually happening rather than what you hope might happen. This process often reveals whether the person is capable of growth or if they're simply committed to maintaining patterns that require others to diminish themselves. Someone who truly cares about you will eventually recognize that their behavior impacts you, even if it takes time for them to develop new skills. Someone who only values what you provide rather than who you are will often become angry or dismissive when you stop making their patterns comfortable. Remember that their initial intensification of avoidant behaviors isn't necessarily the final answer. Just as Blair Waldorf from Gossip Girl often needed time to process when someone refused to play into her drama, avoidant individuals need time to adjust to new dynamics. The difference is that you're no longer waiting anxiously for that adjustment. You're living your life, open to their growth but not dependent on it for your happiness. The most profound shift happens when you realize that someone's capacity for intimacy and consistency isn't a reflection of your worthiness. Their patterns existed long before they met you and will likely continue after you if they choose not to address them. Your role isn't to fix, convince, or prove yourself. It's to be clear about what works for you and honor that clarity regardless of their response. Standing your ground with someone whose patterns have trained you to accept inconsistency isn't just about that one relationship. It's about reclaiming your right to exist fully in your own life, to have needs and standards, to expect basic respect and consideration from people who claim to care about you. The fear that runs through avoidant individuals when confronted with your unwavering self-respect isn't something to be managed or soothed away. It's information about whether they're ready to meet you in authentic relationship. The transformation that becomes possible when you truly understand these dynamics extends far beyond any single relationship. You begin to recognize your own worth, not as something to be proven or earned, but as an inherent truth that guides how you allow others to treat you. The exhausting dance of pursuit and distance loses its appeal when you're grounded in your own value and clear about what genuine partnership looks like. This journey requires immense courage because it means risking loss in service of authenticity. But what you discover is that the relationships worth having are the ones that can withstand your full presence, your clear communication, your refusal to make yourself smaller for someone else's comfort. When you stop participating in dynamics that require you to be less than yourself, you create space for connections that celebrate and support your wholeness. The fear that avoidant individuals experience when you stand your ground is ultimately about recognizing that their strategies for maintaining control while avoiding vulnerability no longer work. Your consistency forces them to confront whether they want genuine connection badly enough to develop new ways of being in relationship. Some will rise to meet that challenge. Others will retreat permanently rather than face their fears of true intimacy. Either outcome provides valuable information and opens pathways to relationships built on mutual respect rather than unconscious patterns of pursuit and distance. The most beautiful discovery in this process is that when you stop trying to earn someone's consistent care and attention, you become available for people who offer those gifts freely. Your willingness to stand firm in your worth doesn't drive away love. It attracts the kind of love that enhances rather than diminishes your life. This isn't about perfection or never feeling uncertain in relationships. It's about knowing that your fundamental needs for respect, consistency, and genuine care are reasonable and worth maintaining. When someone's patterns consistently conflict with these needs, your job isn't to adjust those needs. It's to honor them by choosing relationships that can meet them. That choice, more than any argument or explanation, communicates everything that truly matters about who you are and what you deserve.
Thank you for watching. If you want to learn how to better understand avoidance, relationships, and psychological biases, then subscribe to our channel, because you deserve beautiful relationships.